Hi everyone! We are now ready to tie together the two ideas that we've been working on. So we worked on solving by using square roots, and we worked on completing the square. And what we want to do now is use completing the square to set equations up for the square root property. So we know that square root property only works when you have a single x showing up in your equation. X squared is what we're looking for, but no second term with an x in it. If you have an equation with an x squared and an x floating around, this is when you can use complete the square to rewrite it with a single x. So that's kind of the culmination of everything we've been working on right now. So I've already written the steps out for you for what we're going to do to solve by completing the square. The first thing we need to do is isolate the x and the x squared term, and I've actually already done that here just so you have one example where you can just see what it's supposed to look like. And then the second step that's really important is you need to divide out any coefficient of x squared. In this case, the coefficient of x squared is just 1, so we don't have to do that step either. But these are the setup steps, so make sure you don't miss them. If you don't set up correctly, your complete the square isn't going to be right. Once you get those isolated, we're going to spend a minute just focusing on the x squared and x terms, and we're going to use what we just worked on with completing the square to rewrite that as a perfect square. So we have an x squared plus 8x, and we want to figure what constant we need to make this factor into a perfect square. To do that, we need to remember that we take b, which is the coefficient of x, and divide it by 2 and square it. So we want 8 over 2 squared, which is 4 squared, or 16. When we're working on an expression, we don't have an equal sign, so we're trying to maintain the value of that expression, which means we can multiply by 1 or we can add 0. And what we were doing with complete the square was adding 0. We would add 16, but we would also subtract 16 so that we weren't changing the value. When you have an equation, you could still do that if you prefer, but we also have more tools at our disposal, and one of those tools is that instead of adding and subtracting on one side, you could add the same thing to both sides so that we're focused on maintaining balance instead of adding 0. So that was our step 3. The next step will just be to factor our perfect square. If we've successfully done this, this should factor into 2 identical factors. And I'm looking for factors of 16 that add up to 8, which is positive 4 and positive 4. So that sounds perfect. I'll get an x plus 4 times x plus 4, otherwise known as x plus 4 squared. And on the right-hand side, you can go ahead and add those 2 numbers. If you decided to add and subtract 16 on the same side, you could also now move that 16 over. You should still end up in this exact same spot if you're doing that correctly. Once we've done our factoring, so that was step 4, we're now ready to solve using square root property. So we need to peel off the squared and the 4. The square is the first thing to go, which means we can say x plus 4 would have to equal plus or minus the square root of 25. I can subtract the 4 from both sides. I'm going to put it out in front this time. It's totally fine to put it at the end as well. And then I'm also going to say the square root of 25 is 5. If you end up with a perfect square under there, you're not done. You should evaluate that, and you should even go one step further than that and figure out what the 2 solutions are. So negative 4 plus 5 is 1, and negative 4 minus 5 is negative 9. And those are my 2 solutions. Note that if you get nice integer solutions or if you get fractional solutions, no radicals in the mix, that means you could have solved by factoring. And given the choice, I would always try to solve by factoring first because that tends to be the quickest and easiest, and people make the fewest mistakes with that method. The complete the square and upcoming quadratic formula, those are really focused on when you can't solve by factoring, they should be your go-to. So for now, practice complete the square and square root property on anything you're told to practice it on, but do kind of keep in the back of your mind that you're going to want to eventually be making smart decisions about when to use those. All right, thanks for watching.